Welcome to today's episode. We're here to talk about Natalie Portman's series Lady in the Lake on Apple TV. It first came out on July 19th, and 3 episodes have been released, which I watched. You read the book. Can you give me a synopsis of what this story is like without including spoilers for anybody who hasn't seen it or for people who've seen it but kind of want us to start talking about it?
Yeah, it's split into 3 parts, and Maddie Schwartz, she is the main character.
So it's like expats. When I read expats, it was split into parts, and each chapter kind of followed a different lady.
Well, that's actually interesting because here the story is told in third person when it follows Maddie, the main character, but then the next chapter switches to first person for the character that Maddie meets in that chapter. So Maddie never actually writes in first person, but say if she's at a restaurant with someone, then the waitress will start writing like in the next chapter about what she thought Maddie was like or her perspective on things.
And I think that's authentic to what they do here because they do have the narrator being Cleo. Cleo is the secondary.
And Cleo also has some chapters where, like the voiceover narration that you're seeing, where she will, she'll be doing that.
So we'll see Natalie Portman's character, Maddie Schwartz, and she'll be doing things and stuff like that. And then you'll have Cleo's voice coming over and start talking about what decisions she's making and how it's hurting her, because Cleo ends up being the dead lady in the lake.
Yeah.
But we haven't seen that yet in those first 3 episodes. So what you're describing, the way the book is written, they kind of do that in the television series.
Well, it's almost, I would liken the book to something like It's Such a Beautiful Day, the Don Hertzfeldt film.
Yeah, so it's
sometimes,
surreal.
Yeah, so not only surreal, but it'll sometimes just go off on almost like a rant for like 3 minutes about a different character talking about their lives, and it usually never ties back into what the actual story is about.
It kind of reminded me of In the Bear, how in the first season they would randomly have a bear. The guy would be dreaming, Carmi would be dreaming, and he would see a bear. In the same way, there's a lamb that just keeps on showing up in both women's dreams in like some weird sense. I think that's also
shown in the first episode, because that's the only one I watched.
I think it's in the. I mean, I think she's buying lamb in the first episode. Does that make sense? Or no, she's buying a brisket.
Yeah.
But I thought it did appear in the first episode. It definitely appears in the third episode. But a lot of important imagery. Get us back in line with what the story plot is about, though.
So Maddie Schwartz, she is bored with her life. She's wanting to find something to do. And Laura Lippman, who was the person who wrote the book, even in her author's note, refers to this as a newspaper novel. It's almost, she's trying to find like the next big story, hence The Lady in the Lake. And actually, if you allow me to read the author's note, because I think it talks about something kind of important, because this isn't based on a true story, but she said the book's small details are largely factual, except when they're not. The 2 murders at its center are clearly inspired by 2 cases from 1969, but my versions are not steeped in fact, although I am eternally grateful to Jonathan Hayes for helping me with the theoretical post-mortem on The Lady of the Lake.
And they also take place a few years earlier than that, right? 66, so right after civil rights.
Yeah, the book actually takes place from October 1965 to November 1966, aside from a prologue, which is like 20 years later.
And we get the 1946 storyline, the 1948 storyline, which shows Maddie and Cleo as one is a kid. Cleo's a kid. Maddie is more like a teenager going into adulthood. She's in love with a guy. She's trying to become a writer or a reporter.
Yeah, that is absolutely not the book.
The coolest thing about the scene, though, and we are getting too far away from the overall plot, but like the coolest thing about that scene was I think they used AI in order to de-age her, and it looks super real. Like, again, Natalie Portman, younger years, was Princess Padme and stuff like that.
Yeah,
like, she's beautiful. So, like, showing her at that age, it's a shock to see. Even though she doesn't look, like, really old now, it's just really impressive what they're able to do with CGI.
And even given her career, this is the first TV series where she is the main character.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, because she doesn't do a lot of TV.
I wanted to talk about Sunny, though.
Again, before you talk about Sunny, let's get to the plot of the show. So there's this girl, right? This is from what I understand, from what I've seen.
Yes.
Is that you have Tessie, and she gets murdered real quick in that first episode. And then Maddie stumbles upon the body by the end of the first episode. By then, Maddie is already going through a midlife crisis where she has left her husband. She's still trying to connect with her kid. Cleo's got her own stuff going on. But throughout the next 2 episodes, Maddie becomes more and more intent on trying to solve what happened to Tessie.
Right. And what's Tessie's last name in the show?
Durst, like what Robert Durst, but like her, yeah,
And
Durst.
that's because in the book, I even pointed this out, it's Tessie Fine. What they did in the series is they tried to draw a connection between a character in the book and Tessie Durst, because I think it's supposed to be that person's daughter. But in the book, it's just a normal like girl that ends up dying.
It was super sad because they start off the show. Okay, so this is a painful, suffering type drama, and in that way, I don't like it because you've got a dead kid showing up, you got mental illness being portrayed, you have corrupt cops and poverty in the '60s, anti-Semitism is rampant, racism is also rampant, sexism, homophobia. Sickness. One of the kids has sickle cell. You have shootings going on, like someone is an attempted assassination.
Wait,
Cleo's
what?
Cleo's driving the car for Mrs. Summer, to kill Mrs. Summer because she's forced to. That's in the second episode. The midlife crisis is going on, and then also the narrator is dead. Yet we decide to start the entire show showing a guy dressed as a post box. Literally, he looks like a
Yeah,
post box
right.
whizzing on the side of a building, making me think that it's going to be somewhat comedic. Seeing Brett Gelman's name pop up there, and I'm like, okay, I'm waiting for the comedy to hit, and it never does. So it was such a strange, jarring kind of mixture of genre at the very start. And then I saw this kid who I was expecting maybe she would be kidnapped and that she would find her way home. And no, she's just dead by the end of the episode. And there's something about seeing a dead girl in a TV show, which is very common.
Mayor of Easttown comes to mind.
Of course, The Killing, Twin Peaks, it's been done, but usually the girls are older. And seeing this kid at like younger than 10, and she's saying that for Christmas or Hanukkah, that all she wants is a seahorse, and she goes into a fish shop to buy one or see one. And that's where it cuts, and we no longer see her alive
Right.
after that.
So we skip straight to chapter 7 at the beginning of this show, and then it's like it almost tries to catch us up on the first 6 chapters after that.
Yeah, and it just upset me. It upset me to see this girl die that quickly. And the only flash cut we see where she's being attacked is this big old Santa guy holding up a big old goldfish bowl. And it's just it made me not want to watch any more of it. By episode 2 and 3, we do get some plot movement, and I'm enjoying how good the set design is for the '60s, the costumes, the cars, the styles. But when it comes to the actual story, I do feel like they're not moving forward enough in a seven episode series, right?
Yeah,
Which takes place
right.
through the books to solve this murder. And so I really want to know, I want there to be justice for the little girl.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're supposed to kind of be pissed off that she dies, right? At the beginning, I feel like that's why they made Maddie Schwartz so intent. She's even more intent in the series of finding Tessie than she ever is in the book. It's almost like in the book, she kind of just stumbles across Tessie's body. Here, it was like her one character trait in the pilot.
I mean, the thing about Maddie, though, is I don't think she's actually obsessed about the girl as much as just her own anarchy that's going on in her head. She feels like she had these dreams, these aspirations, that she's been stuck with this dude named Milton, who we find out isn't even the father of her son. And because the son had already read her diaries, he knew that. So when that bomb dropped, he was able to tell his mom, like, yeah, go fuck yourself. I had really been upset with Seth. That's her son's
Yes,
name.
right.
Throughout the series, because I was like, he is treating her like crap. He is taking the father's side the entire time. He's taking Milton's side, despite Milton being shown to be kind of like super Jewish, where he gets mad at his wife over really, really dumb things.
Putting the brisket on the dairy plate.
Yeah, and that's what really like was the last straw for her. But what I'm trying to get at is that Maddie's character, it seems like she's driven by more her own life's choices and the fact that she had a relationship with Alan Durst, who was the kid's father, than actually saving Tessie.
Well, and that's why I was annoyed with, because I guess I finished up the book today, but the chapter that I read, it is they completely manufactured that whole entire Seth is not Milton's kid. In fact, in the book, she confirms in a chapter that she did have sex with Alan Durst, but then 2 weeks later had sex with Milton, who was her husband at the time, because she was cheating on him. But it was for sure Milton's kid. And even though I didn't watch any of episode 2 or 3, I did see that scene, and it just felt like they were trying trying to inject more soap opera than the book really needed to have. But with everything you're talking about, that do you not see my connection with Sunny, the character, as
Oh,
well?
depressed women?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
you think about it, you have female-centric characters, both are based off a book that, one came out in 2019, I think Lady in the Lake one came out in 2018. They're both in their mid-30s, at least in the book. Maddie Schwartz is 37, Susie is 35. You have both that
Yes,
don't have husbands, like, for instance.
they're foils to themselves, and yet they're also running parallel. Cleo is obviously very aware once she's died of Maddie's life. That the relationship with their kids being as strained as it is definitely parallel. Their dreams being so similar, the fact that they see each other very early on in the first episode, and that their lives are very close to one another, but they don't know each other by name quite yet. And then I would also say that there's other people who have parallels. The Myrtle Summers person, who is the lady running to try to bring the African American community out of poverty there. Well,
Right.
then you also have Shell Gordon, who's like the evil dude who's running all the clubs, and he's trying to kill her at the same time. They're both like leaders in their own right. So there's a lot of parallelisms going on in the show, and I think it's in that way very smart. So I give it credit for that.
It's the strangest thing. So Ezekiel Taylor is a huge role in the book. He's basically the main driving force for the third part of it. But they decided to, instead of include him, split him into two characters. One of them being the Myrtle Summer character, and the other being Slappy Johnson, Cleo's comedian husband.
So both
who
people
aren't even in the book.
Yeah, both people sort of are helpful to Cleo. They are supposed to be her support system, but both of them sort of betray her. Slappy's not a great dad. He does love her, and he is a stand-up comedian who is rather successful. And Summer, Mrs. Summer, she's supposed to be helping all these women. And in fact, in the first episode, Cleo comes to her defense, or goes in front of a crowd and says, this is how she's helped everybody in our society, and it would be smart to vote for her for whatever she's running for. And then in the second episode, when she asks for a job from Mrs. Summers, that's when Mrs. Summers like, I can't have you working for me because of your connection with Mr. Gordon,
Right.
who's this evil dude. And Mr. Gordon's saying the same thing. He's like, I can't have people on my payroll who volunteer for this lady who's trying to put me out of business. And so when she gets up to interview for Mrs. Summers in front of a television audience, and Mrs. Summers is expecting her to say the same thing that she did in the first episode, that's when she betrays her, where Cleo's like, fuck this. And she ends up just giving her a death stare.
It reminds
And
me
then-
of The Other Black Girl, that TV series, because that first episode had the same thing where they were supposed to be friends, and then one of
Yeah,
them
the thing about
backstabs the
Mrs.
other.
Summers, though, is she never guaranteed her a job. And so it was just the hurt of not being able to take her kids out of Mr. Gordon's whatever. So she ends up going back to him and then signing up to do some of his dirty work. But by the third episode, she's already been implicated or forced to take part in an assassination attempt of Mrs. Summers, which then leads her to, again, want to leave ASAP. And so one of these unconventional things about this show is that there are just so many characters. And I think that's mostly because the book has probably a lot of
Yeah, I would
characters.
say probably around 20 to 30 that you get passages from.
It's a big cast, and usually with Apple series, you're talking about 3, 4, 5 people at most. It's also taking place in Baltimore, which most Apple shows take place in New York or Chicago or LA.
Yeah, so it was very funny and I think ironic with this TV show, because this came out 2 days before Apple came out with their story saying we're going to have to scale back on TV shows. However, they shot in Maryland, and from what Governor Westmore of Maryland said, this show generated $100 million from shooting there. So it's weird how it was like able to do so much.
It generated for that county or that area, right?
With the amount of like hotels and
yeah
catering.
But that doesn't necessarily help Apple.
No, I know,
not
I understand.
helping their margins or whatever. It's also the longest. It's something that's different than most TV series is that it's got the longest titles of episodes that I've ever seen, and I don't even understand why. From what I know, the book only has like years as their titles, right?
Yeah,
But,
a lot of July 1966.
The first episode is, did you know seahorses are fish? Which is something that the girl says, Tessie says, when she walks into the fish store, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And then it has to do with the search for the marvelous was something that Maddie's character says. May have been in the backflash.
It was marvelous. I had madness here.
Marvelous. Because again, this is like some fancy, like when they have their trippy scenes, it gets all weird, dreamy, state-ish. And then the third episode is I was the first to see her dead. You were the last to see her alive.
That's the only
which
one I
is
could even connect to the book.
Maddie, when she reaches out, so the police, it takes them a while, but eventually they figure out that that the girl was at the aquarium place. And they realize that because of the stuff that she has under her fingernails. And so they do find the guy who was running that
Corwin,
place.
right?
Steven, yes. And Steven's a weirdo, but he's like Paul Dano's character in Prisoners, where you can tell even though he does some crazy stuff, like he wears a gas mask, he takes baths and he puts the fishes in them. He is supposed to be that mentally disturbed character who everybody would assume did something terrible, but clearly didn't.
That was the exact connection that I had in the book. So it seems like out of characters they're most faithful to, Stephen Corwin was correct. Because Cleo in the book, she does care about her kids. She does have 2 kids, but she's not seen as like the saint or as gracious as she is in this TV
I don't know
series.
if she's seen as a saint in this.
She's supposed to be unlikable. I don't know if that's what you got from the first 3 episodes.
No, she is trying her darndest to like do good, I guess, or to get herself out of there. That has been her main motivation. What I'm trying to say is like her character is friends with a cop, but she's still under the impression that the cop is taking money from them. She's not afraid of the underworld in the same way, other than how it affects her kids. If it wasn't for her kids, I think she would probably still stay in it. But because of it ruining her family life, I think that's the main purpose of why she's trying to leave. So if in that way, she is sort of saint-ish.
And what about Ferdy? Because Ferdy is a character in the book, and I know he's also in the TV series.
Who's Ferdy?
Oh, wow. So they don't focus on
No,
him?
I just mean a lot of these names go by my head.
Yolande Noel. He was supposed
the
to be
cop.
the person.
Of course, the cop.
Yeah.
You just got to say the cop. He's having an affair with Maddie, you know? Isn't that weird?
An affair? Because I thought that weren't they divorced?
Maddie has left Milton, but the big thing is like she's still considered his wife. Like she can't even rent a car at this point without having his signature on stuff. And part of that comes with the fact that she has no money. So to get money after she's found Tessie's body, she decides I only have my ring to sell. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend that it was stolen, like I was robbed, because now I'm living in this really seedy apartment in this poverty-stricken community. And so there's an insurance policy on it. And so she calls it in as if it was a robbery. And then the cop is smart enough to figure it out. What's his name again?
Ferdy Platt.
All right. Yes, Platt, Mr. Platt. So he figures out what she's doing. He doesn't really care though. He's just like, it's going to take a while before the insurance kicks in. And then later on they sleep with each other because she's high and there's a lot going on, but he also knows Cleo quite well. And he also probably likes her too. So this could end up as a big love triangle between the cop, Cleo, and Maddie.
How does Maddie get high?
Judith. So Judith is the daughter of the landlord of the Weinstein Jewelers place that she originally tries to pawn off her thing. They offer her the apartment. She takes it. And this Judith lady just wants to hang out with Maddie. You remember in Sunny, you told me how there was a character named Mixie who was obsessed with trying to sleep with the main character.
In the book, yeah, it was different in the TV series.
That's how Judith seems like here. It seems like there's something else going on than her just wanting to be roommates with her. Like she is very, very open and like friendly to the point where it's like if she tried to kiss her, I'm pretty sure they would. And there's like a 20 years age difference, so it's a little weird.
I mean, it seems like when they're following Maddie's story, it's more closely related to the book. But when I was reading about Judith, it just seemed like from the book she was friends with her. Like there was no romantic connection between the two of them.
Yeah, it's strange. The main criticism with the show, besides the fact that it's about suffering, is that the plot is just so slow.
And that was my biggest problem with the book. It was my first book that I read that I didn't really like that much because I even told you when I was reading it, it's so dense. There's just so much that you have to get through.
But that's not the thing. It's like the density here is unnecessary. There's 50-minute episodes, so there's 3 50-minute episodes, and it falls in love with itself. It's like when Kurt Sutter at the end of Sons of Anarchy started releasing 80-minute Sons of Anarchy episodes because he had to include everything
for the final 2 seasons.
But there was no reason for it. They keep on repeating scenes. Like you talk about the affair with Mr. Platt.
Yeah.
We see 2 sex scenes nearly back to back one at the end of the second episode, one at the beginning of the third episode, where neither really or only one of them would have achieved the comp to show that they're together. But then he comes back like 2 minutes later to have sex with her again in the bathroom. There are too many nightclub dance scenes that are kind of shot like a fever dream, and they last a really long time. There are overly dramatic sex scenes. It's not just those two that I just talked about, but like scattered throughout. And it's always in the middle of people yelling at each other or like doing it like super salaciously. Like you saw the first episode, right? Where like she licked his lips while he was like, it was really gross. And then too many scenes with Chloe being sad. No offense to the actress, but like they really milk that. Everything that could go wrong for her basically does. And so she cries about it all the time.
But you see, in the book, it's at least a little more interesting because she's speaking beyond the grave, and she is like, she hates, despises Maddie.
Yes. That's what I was seeing, and I was like, this is also very painful to watch because you're watching this other, there's two storylines going here, and you want to root for someone, right?
Yeah.
And yet you have the one dead character who's not even dead yet in the show just dissing on this other lady, being like, you used my murder for blah, 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 blah. And it's like, what are you talking about? We haven't even seen that yet.
The thing in the book is that Tessie Fine is a white girl, and a lot of people were trying to look for her in the book, and then it's supposed to be that Cleo is dead. She's dead, and she's a black woman, and they're not looking as much for her, and that's kind of what Laura
And I would
Lippman...
understand that, but we're 3 episodes in, and Cleo is very much alive, and so we're not seeing that contrast. Instead, it just seems like this African-American woman is really angry at this Jewish woman who is going through her own life shit.
And it's strange that they would keep Cleo alive for this long.
Right. It doesn't even seem like she's close to dying, because right now the way they leave it is Reggie is the one who forced her to go to the place where they were going to try to assassinate Mrs. Summers. And the only reason he did that was because he knew that the police were looking for someone with a black eye, and he has a black eye, right? Yeah. And so he sent Cleo to do his dirty work for him, and he didn't even tell his boss, Mr. Gordon, about what he was doing. And so in that way, then Cleo starts to blackmail Reggie by the end of the first episode, the third episode, saying, you lace this bet, basically, and make it so that I win and I can get out of here with my kids. And Reggie's like, or I could kill you. In his head, he's thinking that. But then she wakes his girlfriend up. Dora, I think her name is.
Yeah.
Cleo wakes Dora up, and she's like, if I'm dead, it's this guy's fault. And then he gives them both the stare down. And then we're just led to believe that that's what he's going to end up doing.
So it's definitely going to be different than they had it in the book. Because like I said, it seems like the evil characters you're talking about are just completely changed from Ezekiel Taylor. But I know that
Reggie was in the book, right? Number 2?
No. Weird. And so, yeah, it was the 3 people they made up for the show were Myrtle Summer, Reggie Robinson, and Slappy Johnson.
Huh. That's a lot of people to make up for. Is it for how central they are? And also, like, I don't even necessarily think that the show could have survived without them, despite they get a lot of airtime. So in that way, they're central. But you could write it around them, I think, without it being too big.
And that's what the book did. I know that they had Lupita Nyong'o. She was actually signed on for the series for over a year, but then she had to drop out.
It right. Oh, but yeah,
she dropped out, and then they ended up getting Moses Ingram, who I didn't even recognize was Jolene from The Queen's Gambit. Then again, in that series, she's playing a lot earlier. I know
a lot younger.
Yeah, a lot younger.
A lot earlier. A lot earlier in your life.
Alma Har'el directed all the episodes. She also wrote the first 2. She's known from Honey Boy. She directed that, the Shia LaBeouf movie.
Yeah. And did she do something else recently? Because I feel like
she gave birth to a child during the production of Lady in the Lake.
Not what I meant. I thought maybe there was a different show that we had taken. The positives for the show, besides the set design, the backflash to Portman, where the weaving of everyone's relationship so that they know each other. Got to give the story credit for being able to do that pretty well. Redeeming Seth's character from just this really annoying kid, insufferable, that he wouldn't side with his mom for anything, into someone who does. I would assume, because by the third episode here, Maddie has taken up this investigation. She's going to do the full Mindhunter thing with Steven, right?
Yeah.
Or Stefan. and have an interview with him, but they wait until the 4th episode before we actually get to see how that works. And she'll probably realize that he's innocent, and then she'll go looking for some other justification as to what's going on.
I know in the book she writes him, and that's why I was able to gather from the 3rd episode, but I don't think they ever meet.
But she only writes him because she realizes that she wants a job at the paper, and the only way to get the job at the paper is to prove her worth. And so she's the only one who gets this interview with him, and hence why the guy allows her to tail the other reporter,
Bob
the main,
Bauer.
Yes, allows her to be like his number 2.
Yeah, see, that's very much like the book. So it's just like they took it from Maddie's character, but when they got to Cleo, they just decided to change it up a lot, it seems like.
The show also would, I would say, remind me of The Crowded Room as far as how insane Stefan is shown to be. He's shown in his shop dancing, and his mom is laughing, and then we see it from another perspective where SWAT and the police team is right outside the shop. He's wearing a gas mask. His mom is screaming as she's tied up. Like, he's a wacky dude, probably schizophrenic. So Crowded Room-ish, Shining Girls, in the fact that there are these missing people who are being killed and victims in the 60s and moving onward, because there's this guy who was flipping time in that show. I don't think this is supernatural. And then
the book certainly
I Am the Night, I would say, because that also has to do with an old reporter, Chris Pine, or playing older, and he's like trying to investigate what's going on with this young girl who is related to the Black Dahlia killer, right? But I think that's based more on a reality than this is. This feels like it's trying to checkmark a bunch of boxes and about pain and suffering. Yeah.
Laura Lippman, she because she based the 2 murders off of people that actually died, but she didn't use like the actual names.
Did she credit them?
Well, it's on the Wikipedia, if that's what you mean. I don't think really here she does in the book. But John Mark Valet, you even saw his name pop up in the credits. It said "in loving memory of him," and he was the person who directed and edited Dallas Buyers Club season 1 of Big Little Lies.
Oh, Big Little Lies.
Objects.
Does this remind you of Big Little Lies?
Yeah. It's definitely Nicole Kidman's character, just like
because she leaves her husband, right?
Yeah, it's
and
also
the husbands
the
are always
angle.
Presented as like real assholes.
Well,
and
he was an executive producer for this, but he always thought to himself, "What if Natalie Portman, once he signed on, was Maddie, and that's how they were able to get her?"
Well, there's a couple of things. One is like, does Milton ever have a comeback? Like, does he ever show himself to be a good guy? Because it feels like they cast kind of big, and they put him at the fourth name for him not to come back and do something nice.
There's one other scene with him that happens by the end that is somewhat redeemable, but I don't think he's ever seen as not pathetic.
Okay. Having evil Santa being the thing that you're looking for ultimately is annoying. Like, I don't, it feels like too much of a tease to
and
be
it's
like
entirely made up. It just seemed like they wanted to do something creepy and have the contrast be Santa.
And the other thing is that Portman is no stranger to this plotline actually happening in her own life, and I'm talking about specifically the diaries. So in one of the scenes, and that was my last thing of like, the plot is too slow, they have too many scenes with her and Judith, too many bonding scenes between those two. I get it, they're friends, but one of them is where Judith, this like hippie-ish lady, they're getting high, and she starts talking about how she's memorized all these diary entries of this other lady. And then later on, you had Seth talking about Natalie Portman's diary, or Maddie's diaries, that he had also like read and stuff. And obviously, Natalie Portman is famous for the New York Times thing where she had sent all those letters to that other guy. It was like an emotional affair, and those had been dispersed to the public for everyone to enjoy. So I wonder if she brought any of that into this character and was like, "This is how angry I was when I found that out."
Well, I've been wanting to tell you. You know who played Seth? The brother in The Quiet Place, the first 2 films, Ford v Ferrari, Honey Boy. Yeah. I mean, he's been in a ton. The Night Manager. The series itself, what would you give it out of 10?
Oh, so it doesn't do enough to move the dial in one way or the other. There were parts that legitimately just upset me, and I was annoyed with how painful it was. But then the other things, for instance, I didn't know there was a job back in the day where women were mannequins. Like, where they were just paid to be sitting out or standing outside, like I would assume a Macy's type department store, and just sample the clothing.
That was strange.
And we see it so many times because that's Cleo's day job. And so she keeps on rushing there. And every time she rushes there, she's always crying about something. And one of which is like watching a shooting going down. So I understand that she's sad, but like it's also how many times before someone starts complaining, like your mannequin's just breaking down at the front, like that before they would start asking some questions. They do seem like already pretty racist towards her. So it is kind of like, I hope she keeps the job, but she's going to end up dead pretty soon.
I
right?
mean, race is a huge thing in the
Obviously.
book.
Yeah. Is there a positive reception to it so far?
Has a 6 on IMDb, 75% on Rotten Tomatoes with a 55% audience score. However, the people that like it really like it. Like The Guardian gave the series 5 out of 5 stars and says it's so sumptuous that its brilliance threatens to overwhelm you. But then you have other places like Vulture writing a negative review that's very sappy and it's not like the novel, and it just like kind of takes away all the murky tension that the novel had. But Natalie Portman's performance has been praised throughout.
I'm assuming because of the whodunit style narrative that the novel has some big reveal ending. Is it worth it to stick around for either the book or the show?
I would say no in both cases.
Ooh, okay. All right. Well, anything else that you want to talk about this drama thriller miniseries?
That's about it, I think.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode. I hope you enjoyed this one. Bye.
Bye.